Welcome to Too Much Music,
a show where two music know-it-alls talk about making music in a world
that probably already has a little too much music in it.
Allow me to introduce Alison. She's an indie hero who's written thousands of songs and can rock a pedal board like nobody's business.
But I also have graduate degrees in music theory and know quite a bit about how the brain processes music. And this here is Greg. He's a legitimate conservatory-trained doctor of music who can conceive of musical sounds that we mere mortals can't even comprehend.
Okay, yeah, but I'm also an old-school 80s goth, and I'm currently living on the road and producing music out of a studio that I built in my RV.
We used to be married.
But now, we just have this podcast. Welcome to Too Much Music. Today, Alison and I will discuss how music is valued in Western culture. Certainly, we can all agree that creativity is essential to humans, but how do we value it economically and culturally, at least in the United States? And specifically, we'll talk about music since that's our area of expertise. If you look at grant-funded organizations that deal with music, you will see that they argue that music education and music and culture breeds stronger creativity, improved emotional balance, promotes self-esteem, aesthetic awareness, emotional expression, social harmony, and things like this.
Community connection, lack of loneliness, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's a million.
Yeah, but Alison and I kind of want to talk, I think, about two basic things: the business models of musical creativity and cultural awareness. Where are we in terms of cultural awareness of music? How does that affect how musicians work and how we consume culture and music?
Yeah, so the first part, the business model, I think, in my opinion, is where you almost have to start with this, because I think culture has become such a large-scale commodified industry that if you don't talk about how music is being pushed out first, you can't really address the individual or human side of it, which probably speaks to my bias in terms of what I think about the world. But I do think that, corporate decisions, that's what actually trickles down, folks. So we're going to talk about, how the music industry became so reliant on streaming for just a minute. I think probably most people are pretty familiar with the story, so I'll tell a very brief version of it, but just in case you're not, in the 90s, it was the heyday of CD sales. The music industry was riding high and making just tons of money off of selling music, and individual musicians who were involved in those recordings were getting paid. Maybe not as much as they wanted all the time. So
they were selling physical copies, and those physical copies had a certain value. And of course, when it moved to digital, copying was free, basically, right?
Yes, these were things called compact discs, children. And you had to go to your local record store and buy one a month with your allowance or whatever. So I think Napster is this first service that became popular where folks started sharing music with each other via MP3 files. And that started in 1999, I believe, and they started getting sued very quickly. Probably by 2000, there were lawsuits happening. I think, if my memory serves correctly, Metallica kind of got the ball rolling on that. I think they had a demo that got released, and they were really pissed off about it, and so they sued, and then, basically the entire music industry just started suing Napster and killed it. But by that time, Pandora's box was open and people knew, oh my God, I don't have to buy a CD anymore. These are just digital files. I have a computer. I can listen to them. I can give them to my friends. And so the music industry, in my opinion, overreacted to this problem. And this eventually ended up with the business model that exists now, where everyone pays, $8 a month, $12 a month, and they get access to all the world's music for $12 a month. I mean, just imagine. Just imagine that, right?
So that does several things. I mean, it certainly makes music easier to get or to access, and we can share it, maybe making quick playlists and I know that when I share my playlist with you, or if I mention the name of an obscure musical act, you will be able to find them quickly and listen. But it also means that the way in which musical artists make money is completely changed. So now it's ubiquitous, which is wonderful in a way. It democratizes the situation, but it also creates other problems, right?
Yeah, very similar to the larger internet. I think there are two major issues with this. One, as you mentioned, is the way that musicians get paid. The royalties for streaming are just dismal, and musicians who are contributing or creating these recordings are not able to use that. Even ones that you would think would be making tons of money off their recordings are not any longer, because basically the major labels who account for almost all of the plays, they have a good deal with Spotify, and they get paid for their catalog, but the individual musicians who are getting paid by their labels do not have a good deal. So they're getting, tiny fractions of a penny per stream, and it's no longer a relevant source of income for almost any musicians. So recordings now, which has been, since, for at least the last half of the 20th century, was the primary way that musicians made money, that's disappeared. It's gone. It's not possible anymore. So now an entire segment of the population, the creative population, has had to figure out how to make money, from scratch.
Okay. And then what does this do to consumers, the people who consume it, in terms of cultural awareness?
Well, let's go back to that.
And value.
Yeah, let's go back to that experience of a high school kid in the 90s, which I was. So I'll speak to my own experience. I lived in a small town in West Texas. I had no idea what was going on in the larger world because the internet was barely a blip. So I would go down, weekly at least to my local big chain record store, and I would look through the music, and I would look at things that caught my fancy. And that's not by any means the best way to find out about music, but that's how it worked for a large number of people. And I would, buy a couple of CDs a week if I was lucky and listen to those like crazy. And of course, there was borrowing going on and all kinds of stuff like that. But that's how it worked then. Now, today, how does it work? Well, people open an app on their phone, and the app tells them what to listen to from a giant stream of content, and based on essentially statistics and machine learning algorithms. So it's trying to guess what that person will listen to for the longest and give it to them.
So you have a physical object that you've invested your allowance in, or whatever you've invested more money in. You develop a relationship with it because you don't have a lot of choice. So you really are spending a lot of time with the B-sides, so to speak. You're really learning every track on that album, etc. And you're choosing it. You have to choose from your record collection, which, who knows, a couple dozen records. Okay. You're developing a deeper relationship with those fewer artists. Now you have this algorithm, Pandora, whatever, sending you a radio station of things that it thinks it's targeting your mood. You may hear a song and never hear it again. You may not hit the thumbs up, but it's being delivered to you by statistical data, generally speaking, similar listeners to you, etc. And you may or may not have a way to react or get involved or even become aware of what you just heard.
And not only that, it's being delivered to you on a device that has 8 bajillion other things on it, right, that are also vying for your attention. Notifications are pinging.
It's part of an internet stream.
Yeah, and so that word attention, I think, is one that's really important to the conversation. It's very difficult to pay attention to anything anymore. I think everyone is sort of realizing that en masse at the moment. Most people who value their own brains are trying to find ways to fix it, but it's very, very difficult. And so if you have that easy in listening experience where you're just opening an app and hitting a button, you're not very invested in what's coming out of your little earbuds there. It's more of a background for other things that are happening, which is a very, very different way. I mean, look, we're not trying to say there was some golden age of people sitting, it's like you imagine in the 70s, people sitting in front of their hi-fi system in a leather chair with their leather books behind them,
I was there. That is exactly what we did. No, it's not.
Oh, you were 5 in the 70s. Come on.
Sure, but I was there.
You did have leather-bound books. I do know that.
And I had leather-bound books, many leather-bound books, smelled of mahogany, and I had a hi-fi with Reader's Digest record collections. For real, that I did.
Listener, Greg
And
was
I did sit in front
never
of the
a
hi-fi
child.
listening to those because I was such a weird kid. Okay. Well, okay, this also, though, goes to the fact that music is now behind, it's always been behind TV shows and other media like this, but we have so much more of that. So there is so much more incidental music than there ever was. It's wonderful to a degree. We need composers to fill that need. But I think it also means that to a consumer culturally, you have an experience where you become desensitized to this. And reality TV hits me hard because I guess I'm old, but also when I hear reality TV and like there's this constant danger music, this drone forever and these gong gong hits everywhere all the time, trying to make me feel manipulated in this danger is around every corner sort of way. But when that happens for half an hour straight, people, you get desensitized to this, and I'm not sure that's a positive thing that's happened, and there might be changes in the way in which we react to music because of this exposure, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's interesting to think about. I mean, musicians are at root, we're social creatures, and we want to make music that people like. It's a constant struggle and pull for a lot of musicians because you want to express your own creativity and follow your own path, but you also want to create something that people engage with. So when people are engaging with music at large in a different way, it changes what musicians will make. That's the Faustian deal that you make as a musician. You have to engage with people. So I think it's an incredibly relevant example and question of, that reality TV music, I agree, it's absolutely insane. If you're paying attention to it at all.
From an aesthetic point of view, right?
Yeah.
From an aesthetic point of view, you couldn't be less good. And this is an objective, right? So it couldn't be worse. I think it's actually bad for people. Nobody wants or can take that kind of danger. Like you can't, that doesn't make sense. We don't work emotionally this way, and yet that's what's coming at us. That's what we're feeding into our heads. There's no form. There's no contrast over time. And I wonder how many consumers, because we're getting trained by this media to deal with that or to accept it as the norm. In fact, if TV's running in the background all day or much of the day, that's a sound you're going to hear, whatever it is, whether it's super happy, hyped up stuff or super danger, whatever. You're going to hear these musical affects, and they're going to, so I wonder how critically the consumers of culture have been desensitized. Are they being desensitized? Can we do anything, or should anything be done to help engender a little more critical thinking about how that stuff works so that people do reject ultimately media that doesn't offer contrast, let's say emotionally?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about the change of that. Let's just talk about film and TV music both, actually. You and I have watched shows from various eras, movies from various eras over the years, and one of the things that we've noticed, and no, we have no evidence to back this up, but it's a freaking podcast, who cares? One of the things that we've noticed is that it seems that when you go back to older movies, even from the 80s, the composers who are writing that music are clearly very high. They've gone to music school. They have studied all the great classical composers, and they're using those same techniques in their music.
Tropes.
It's a technical fact. There's, I used to be a music theorist. I could sit down and show you exactly why. Again, it's a podcast. Nobody cares. But it's true. And today's musical, today's scores, there are some like that. It's not that doesn't exist anymore, but even even the greatest film music composers will say Hans Zimmer.
Yeah.
He's not.
I was just thinking.
Yeah.
I was just thinking this. You obviously can compare John Williams, Hans Zimmer. Okay, so the obvious go-tos. Da 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 da. Whatever you hear, E.T. Whatever you can think of all the John Williams themes. Hans Zimmer is incredibly brilliant at creating a musical world, a real musical world with identity and character out of two notes, out of one drone. I mean, this is very different.
This is new.
In the approach.
Yes, and why? Why did we, as a culture, decide? I mean, that happened by hundreds of small decisions. People hiring who they chose, and directors saying, "Well, I want it more like this than like that." But it was people who decided that they wanted this different style of music today. That is, frankly, much less. It's less reliant on the old standbys of, melody, harmony, and rhythm as the three pillars of how you write music, right?
So we're identifying this grand funnel, and we do sound a little bit like old crotchety people.
Well, I think we are.
It used to be different in the day, and of course, it's fine that these things change and evolve. Absolutely, I think we both agree on that. The question is, are there things we should be watching out for? Is music less valued because of this? Or is it more valued in some respects? Or I wonder this too. There are segments of the population who just aesthetically, there is data on this, but I'm not going to point us to it right now, but there's data on this. There are segments of the population that just don't care what they're listening to, really. They just don't have that aesthetic awareness. They're never going to. It's okay. And then there are sections, everybody's on a spectrum here. There are people who care and will always care and will pick very carefully what it is they listen to and will seek out things that aren't what their peers are listening to. That's fine. That's always going to be the case in any given society. I wonder though, is there a role? So when people go to school, public school, not everybody's going to do advanced calculus. Cool. But everybody is expected to graduate being able to do basic arithmetic. You have to be able to track your finances, read a receipt from a store. If you don't do your taxes, the IRS, you can't say, I don't know math. I don't understand addition, subtraction, so I can't fill out my taxes. My point being, is there a basic sort of responsibility that citizens have and that we should have as a society to educate people in terms of their cultural awareness of music, or am I just living in a first world bubble?
Well, maybe both.
Okay.
I think there's been an awful lot of writing and discussion, especially over the last 10, 15 years in classical music, particularly about this topic. Because, if you think music at large is becoming less relevant, well, once you get specifically into classical music or Western art music or whatever you want to call it, music in that tradition, the relevancy just goes, to the floor. And I hope no one I know hears me say that because they'll be sad. But the numbers pretty much bear it out.
We're going to put this on YouTube, I think. So.
Oh, shit. Can I say shit on YouTube?
I think so. I don't know. Not kid friendly.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that. Anyway, I think there's I'm about to show you the real me here, and the real me is a big nerd. So there's a guy called Lawrence Kramer. If you're a big nerd in music, you might have heard of him. He's a musicologist. He's postmodernist. Don't necessarily agree with him all the time, but he wrote a sort of public intellectual book at one point called Why Classical Music Still Matters. And obviously by the title, he's trying to make the case that it does. And, one of the things, I think his main point in that book is that classical music in particular does things for people that only it can do, that there are things that can happen in people's minds that can't happen without it, I think he said something like that, it fires the imagination in ways that nothing else can, which I happen to agree with. And yet, even if these things are true, it doesn't seem to matter. And I think maybe your point about arts education is, it speaks to why it doesn't seem to matter. Because if people don't understand well enough to listen critically and understand what they're hearing, I mean, whether it's classical music or not, how much are they really going to invest in it personally, whether that's monetary or psychological or attention or time or focus or whatever. If it just sort of sounds like a blur to you, you're probably not really going to care too much if it's not a big part of your life or if it's only background.
I've certainly had the experience. I've come out of movies with people, smart people, thoughtful, critical thinking people who say, I make a comment about the score or something about the music, and they say, "Oh, was there music in this movie?" Or how? Yeah, I didn't even notice. And I understand that's, to some degree, they're overwhelmed by the experience, and that makes sense. But I feel like that there's something a little bit lacking here, where again, we're talking about music only, but music education, whatever there is of it in the public sector, really should focus on, I think, okay, so in Greg's world of King Greg, music education would be about critical thinking in terms of how music could affect you. What is musical mood? What is contrast over time? How do we, in terms of music, how do we identify that? And I think maybe even beyond that, given where we are technologically speaking, an awareness of how musical mood is used to manipulate us, and how music coming at us in a stream based on an algorithm, statistically driven algorithm, which will be the case for a long time to come, one way or another. What do we need to do to discern, that we have to defend ourselves a little bit about on this front. We need to, true probably for all streaming media, but musically, what is that doing to us? How are they using that to track us? I mean, I feel like that's all should be part of musical education. Maybe that's...
Wait, are we about to go into some QAnon stuff here?
It's a conspiracy. I don't think it's a conspiracy, but these are things that are affecting us every day, just like social media does, etc. Educating ourselves on how that happens. I doubt most people are aware that music is used to track your mood in real time, and that data is sold to advertising agencies that then target you based on what mood they think you're in because of the Pandora station that you chose.
Yeah,
I'd like to know that. I do know that, but I think that's important to know.
Let's expound on how that happens, because I think probably a lot of people don't really know that that's happening. Some of our past business experiences have exposed us to some things on this front that are actually pretty creepy, and I do think people should know. So basically what Greg's saying is that when you listen to your Spotify music, you do have to make choices. Your finger has to pick this or that. And sometimes you might even actually type something in. But whatever you're listening to, Spotify's assumption is that is indicative of your current mood, and probably something of your current activity. So it's really telling Spotify a lot about what you're doing, right? Just based on the musical choice that you've made. And, if you keep, a really simple example is, if you keep listening to sad music for 3 days in a row, that sadness, that personal sadness that you're feeling, that human experience that you're having that's maybe not so pleasant, is now going to be sold to advertisers who want to know that you're sad, because a sad person is susceptible to certain things. They're susceptible to buy, certain products. And so my question is, do you want that? Do you want that advertising to come at you that way? Again, based on, a very real experience that you had, a breakup or whatever that caused you to be sad. And the answer for me, obviously, is no. I do not want that. But at least you should know that it's happening, and you should know that you're susceptible to it.
Mm-hmm. So that somewhere in your brain you can say, I got to remember that this particular advert is it could be targeting my emotional state right now, and I might be more vulnerable to it. I mean, we're all going to be vulnerable to this. And you okay.
Sorry, I mean, when we talk about the value of music, I don't want to hammer this point too hard, but frankly, when you're talking about monetary value, that is one of the ways in which music is monetarily most valuable today. It's as an indicator, right? Yep, so these companies, you don't see this, right? It's not on the surface. It's not in your app. You don't see any evidence of it, but they're selling that information. And again, music has traditionally been one of the most personal, and we still think of it this way, a lot of us, one of the most personal decisions you can make is, it shows people who you are. You wear the T-shirt of your favorite band, to
where you're from, who you hang out with,
all kinds of things. It's part of your own personal culture, and so when that becomes fodder, for companies to advertise you, I would think that would piss people off. But if it's not obvious, maybe it doesn't.
And I would just, in case you feel like the musical side of things, your mood, your emotional state isn't so important to this advertising thing, remember that this is coming probably from your mobile device, which is not only giving them that information, it's also aware of how fast you're walking, are you driving, are you not, are you sitting at your office, are you sitting at home, what time of day is it, what other things are you scrolling through on Facebook, what did you just like
are you
on
sitting
Instagram?
In your media room ashamed to be watching season 4 of Friday Night Lights? Just an example.
Is that saying. Okay?
Greg doesn't understand. Right. Yeah, Greg doesn't.
I don't understand Friday Night Lights, but I didn't grow up in Texas. So it's okay.
The shame of it all. Oh, God.
Oh, my goodness. Well, so let's talk a bit about how that algorithm works, because the algorithm itself isn't actually discerning your mood. That's one of the things I would argue is a big problem right away. That algorithm, it will get better and better at doing this, maybe to our general dismay. But generally speaking, the mood that it's pulling from your musical choices are data driven. They're statistically driven. It's not subtle. It's not getting subtle information from this. In other words, the very foundation of the assumptions that it's making about your mood, I would argue, are not very good, and may not be for kind of a long time. So if that's true, that's already, we're off to a bad start there.
So you're saying it's a blunt instrument, basically.
It's a very blunt instrument. And I would argue too that
we're looking at happy, sad. Sorry, we're having a delay. Yeah.
It's okay.
Which is why we're talking over each other. So you're saying those algorithms are happy, sad, sort of excited or calm.
Yeah, and you can gain, again, I know if my phone knows how old I am, so it's going to think, if I pick something from the 80s, it's going to know I was in high school in the 80s, and it's going to, so it might assign some nostalgic, qualities to that mood or something, so it's not just based on the musical happy, sad of the musical content, but yes, it's a bigger picture that's happening all the time. It's getting refined all the time. It's something that people should know about, and I think it's something that should be part of an artistic or creative education, because that's what machines are increasingly attempting to pull from us. And then, well, no, I think that's, there we go. So, boy, where does that leave us? I mean, is there a solution to this?
Well, I mean, I think there are a couple more issues to talk about.
Good.
One being, if musicians aren't able to make money on their recordings anymore, well, how do they do it? And I think that there's another kind of insidious bit there that maybe wouldn't be super obvious if you haven't been in the middle of it, that might be important for people to know about, or to think about. And that's this. So Guitar Center figured out a long time ago that marketing to musicians, that musicians themselves are a market, right? And there are enough people that are interested enough to spend some money on it, and they'll go down and play play Stairway to Heaven and, buy the Epiphone guitar. But that business model of marketing to musicians has grown and grown and grown. And one of the reasons it's grown is that a huge source of income for musicians was taken away, right? So now you have this large group of people who's dedicated an awful lot of time and energy to being good at music. They might have studied it, or at least they're very practiced. So we're talking about people who can really play instruments or really produce, who are extremely good at what they do. And now a major income stream is just cut off. So what do? Well, one of the things that they've done is they have begun to make money by creating products for less educated or less practiced or younger musicians. And a great example of this is sample and loop libraries. So, you get a percussionist who's really good at playing a variety of percussion instruments, and they might get paid to create grooves, basically to create loops of themselves playing those instruments that then somebody can open Ableton, drag that loop into their project, then find another great musician playing something else and drag that on top, and the software makes them play in time together, and voila, you have something that's approximating good music, but the person who's actually putting it together is not actually necessarily doing that much of the music making, right? Mm-hmm. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's a very different way of creating than when you had a tape machine running and you could only just record essentially what was in the room. Obviously, there are a lot of nuances to this that I'm not discussing, but I do think that pattern, so that the people who are actually good players are not necessarily the ones that are named musicians that you would have heard of, right? They're the people sort of underneath.
So let me do a counterpoint to that over top of my squeaking puppy who's asking for attention. My counterpoint to that would be this. So I just looked it up. Guitar Center is a publicly traded company. They do well over $1 billion a year. I mean, so this is a big business. It employs a lot of people. Not everybody is going to be that specialist percussionist or bass player or something like this. So it could be argued then that placing the skills, or you're creating business opportunities in music that weren't there before for people who want to participate but maybe aren't trained, don't have those skills, aren't going to have those skills, and the folks who do have those skills get to sell things to those folks. Aren't you just creating more economic value then in the music industry?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a lot of argument against what you just said. You are. I think my question goes toward, so there's that type of value, right? So on that front, I would say it's a net positive. But if you're thinking about focus or attention or engagement with music, like close engagement, that personal close engagement, that that Lawrence Kramer version of music where it fires our imaginations in ways that no other human activity has ever done. I don't think it's probably a net positive on that front. And here's why. I think when people, and it takes time, culture changes slowly, but when slowly over time, music becomes less engaging, more static, more background, less personal, I think that you end up with a situation where, as I said at the very beginning, musicians will make music that people want to listen to, right? And that's more true than ever now that you can actually count, right? We're all getting these statistics back. If you're using Instagram, you know exactly what people like that you're doing. It's not a mystery to you anymore. You have numbers. You're not guessing based on how loud people clap at your shows. You're getting a stream of information back that's telling you. So what people are doing is they're noticing, because people are smart. They're going to look at those numbers and they're going to go, oh, these are higher here. I'm going to do more like that. So once that turns into a feedback loop, which it clearly has. I mean, for a long time that's been happening. I do believe that music gets less personal. It gets less weird. It gets... Now, of course, the counterpoint to that, my own counterpoint, is that there's a whole lot of... There are many people out there reacting against this right now, making very interesting and strange and wonderful things that have nothing to do with what people will like. And that's, it's... The numbers are very small compared to, people who are trying to make...
They're not making a living.
No, no, they're not. Of course, neither are the people who are trying to make beats for Drake. Almost none of them, except for the people who actually end up making beats for Drake, and they're still not doing great. I mean, it's a weird situation, right? It's like the rising tide opposite. It's like the rising tide is actually sinking all ships somehow, and
it creates a bigger 1% issue. Yeah, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would. So basically, this democratizing force, the internet, has turned out to be exactly the opposite.
At least the way we've used it. Man, this is some doom and gloom.
I blame advertising.
And listeners to our podcast will learn that Alison blames pretty much everything on advertising.
Yeah, it's true. There are two answers. If you ask me what the answer is, there are two.
Oh, boy.
Well, the first answer is money. The second tier answer is either advertising or campaign finance reform. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Okay. Well, I think that's where we're going to leave it for this episode. Hopefully it's been an interesting, at least, start into some of these topics. I think it is. I think there's a lot to cover here. Maybe some other episodes in the future will be about these specific areas that we covered.
I particularly, I'm going to cut you off. You're trying to wrap it up. I'm going to say some more stuff. I particularly would like to potentially talk more about, the difference in film music, how that's changed. I think that's a really interesting, specific musical topic. And I think it's one that points to some larger scale things in our culture that are really interesting. So how has film music changed since the 40s to today? So that and, classical music, its influence on popular music and film music, is it really there? Is it really a thing? How is it related? I think these are...
And how do people view classical music? Certainly today, most people would look at Beethoven as... They have a sort of cardboard 2D idea of Beethoven as something old that everybody used to listen to, just like they listened to their favorite band, and that's just absolutely not correct. Beethoven's role in society was so different than anything that we have today, because society was so different, the way it was structured, etc. There's a lot there to unpack. Wow,
I'd say, in fact, there's maybe a little too much music.
A little too much music maybe today. Okay, well, this is awesome. That's very helpful. We will look at those as future topics. Thank you so much for joining us, as usual. And we will talk to you and see you on the flip side. Until then, see you. Goodbye.